Hello, I am super delighted to welcome you all to the first in the series of our trainings. All the trainings are designed to help you meet up with the necessary needs that will make you to improve the quality of how you set your questions, how you can improve your productivity, leveraging on technology, and various other aspects of your professional needs when it comes to research as well as teaching. You are welcome once again. The first in the series of the trainings we shall be focusing on starting from today, 3rd February 2024, is crafting high quality teacher-made text. Crafting high quality teacher-made text. I'm your facilitator, Shanu Adepoju. I'm a professor of educational research and evaluation, as well as the Director of Research and Development Directorate at Gombe State University, Nigeria. To start with, let's get an introduction as to what we intend to achieve from the training for today. Let me start with this wonderful picture. As you can see picture of two doors leading into a room. And on the door, you can see both past and the future. And you can see light well lit in the room in which the doors lead to. That exactly is what we intend to achieve. What do we mean by this? We will need to come through the door that will take us from the past to the desired future. The past has to do with what we are doing presently, in which we have been setting questions so wrongly. And what is the desired future we intend to take us to? To develop visionary test creation skills, to elevate our question writing skills for engaging assessments. Put in mind that we will need to keep on reminding ourselves of the past in order to get to this desired future. I need to inform that this is our desired future. This is our intention, ultimate intention. We cannot achieve it today, but it's achievable with the very first step that we are taking today. So what is the first thing? The first thing is the goal. This is attainable in the near future or nearer future, still a little bit ahead of the intended future. And what is the basic goal of this presentation for today? Is to aid each and every one of you to appreciate two basic things. One, specificity. Two, objectivity as vital criteria that will enhance the quality of test items. This is one thing that we want you to have in mind when you are setting questions. Even if there's nothing attempted in the training today, let this be it at the back of your mind that every question you set, have it in mind that must have this vital quality, specificity and objectivity. To still break it down nearer, what is it that we intend to achieve at the end of today? This is our objective. By the end of the presentation today, which is achievable at the end of the presentation today in the near 45 minutes or so, each participant should be able to provide an operational definition of each of the following terms: test, measurement, subjective, and objective measurement. Each person should be able to classify test items based on item format. Each participant should be able to outline the basic qualities that every test item must process. Everyone, by the end of our presentation interaction today, should be able to outline the basic errors to avoid in test item construction. Let me mention that because of time and many other factors, we will not be able to take your questions immediately. Please drop questions that you have in the comment section, and we promise that we shall attend to all these questions. Now, let's go to the first target, operational definition. The first thing is to define some terminology, definitions of terms. What do we want to define? Let's note that this is not an academic exercise. There are quite a number of terminologies that are associated with testing, but we'll focus attention on just 3 of those terminologies that we feel will be of help. One is test, the other is measurement, and of course, related to that is subjective and objective measurement. Let's start from the beginning. Operationalizing test and testing. How do we define test? Let's take this from the biological point of view. When we talk about biology, we're talking about stimulus and response. We know, those of us who have little background knowledge of biology, talk about stimulus that will lead to response. So let's take our test as any stimulus. That stimulus can be in form of a question, can be in form of a demand, can be in form of a task, can be in form of an assignment. That stimulus is then soliciting for a response or responses from the testees. The testee then will, the responses then will have to be measured in order to determine the extent to which the goals of instructions have been met. Let's calm down and say this once again. Let's assume you give your students the paper. That paper, you could refer to it as a test. But what makes it a test? That paper contains information that acts as stimulus. For example, you talk about describe, you talk about mention, identify, outline, or what have you. Each of these is a stimulus, and that is what makes it be a test. For example, maybe you ask, that's a question now, what is your name? That is a stimulus, and that stimulus is in form of a question. What is your name? And that is soliciting for a response from the person you have asked, who is expected to respond to that test, which is the stimulus. Note that it is a response that you are now concerned about to determine whether what you have taught has been learned. And that process is also known as measurement. Take note, they are all integrally related. Another terminology we want to take a look at is testing. In a simple, very simplified form, rather, we can refer to testing as the process of administering the test. Just by the way, some of my students will tell you test is a noun, testing is a verb. Well, I'm not in the area of grammar, but what we want to know is that that word test is very critical. And by the way, we also need to let you know whether you talk about quiz, you talk about examination, you talk about continuous assessment. What we are talking about in this presentation, everything is regarded as test. So when we talk about test, it refers to whichever way you carried it out, whether In the examination, you call it whichever form, whether it's an experiment you are doing or in the laboratory, so long you are providing a stimulus that the student will respond to, and you will measure that. Now, critical point to also look at is measurement. You can look at this. What does it entail? You see a rule and some instrument to take data as it were, or tools. But when we talk about measurement, we are not just giving a definition, we want to operationalize it so that we get a good concept of what it means. Put in mind our good conceptualization of these terminologies, just the basic one, will help us to be able to craft high quality test items. When we talk about measurement, what does it mean? Measurement can be regarded simply as the process of ascribing quantitative values to qualities based on prescribed rules. Note, prescribed rules. We're going to emphasize on that later. We can also say that measurement is the process of assigning numbers to qualities based on prescribed rules. So as it were, what you are measuring is a quality, but you attach number to it. You are attaching quantitative values to quality. So usually when you give a test and you obtain a score, measurement has taken place. Take, for example, you provide a stimulus in form of a question, that is test, to a learner. Describe how you can move from point A to point B. That which you demand the student to describe is a quality that you are testing. Now, after the student has responded by describing, either verbally or in writing, you now score and say the student scores so value 7/10 as an example. What this implies is that you have converted, you have attached numbers, quantitative value to that quality of being able to describe what you have asked him, demanded of him to describe. So a measurement then is a score that has been assigned on the basis of a test, but note, based on prescribed rules. This is important. We're going to be emphasizing this. So invariably, we always say that test free on measurement. Without measurement, test cannot really take place, because measurement help you to make meaning of the responses you have obtained from the test. Let's take our operationalizing measurement to another level. Note, one of the things we want to describe is subjectivity and objectivity in measurement. This is one of the things we want to define. Let me see if we can take this as a drawing. Watch. The question is, who is more beautiful? Okay, we are having, yes, this lady is weighing 40 kg and height 1.8 meter. The lady is labeled Lady A. Another lady, she weighs 100 kg and the height is 1 meter. She's Lady B. The question is, who is more beautiful? If I allow anyone to comment, you can drop your answers on the comment section. But the truth is, each one of us will have reasons why we feel A is more beautiful than B, or B is more beautiful than A. And we'll argue and argue. Perhaps at the end of the day, we might just conclude that beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder. Take note, We are not talking about beauty here, but we are trying to get the concept of subjectivity and objectivity in measurement. Let's just take it a little bit further. Perhaps maybe you might not appreciate those caricature diagram. Let's make it more realistic. Subjective versus objective measurement. We talked about Lady A, and also we talked about Lady B. Lady A weighs 40 kg, height 1.8 meter. How will she look like? Okay, before then, Lady B weighs 100 kg and a height 1.0 meter. Wow, see elegance. Good. That represents Lady B, Lady A rather. How about Lady B? Oh, wow. She's also elegant. So the question still remains, who is more beautiful? Let's note, we are not talking about beauty, subjectivity and objectivity in measurement. This is one critical thing that I want us to get from this training. Let's start with subjective measurement. We're still going to focus on these two ladies. What do we mean when we talk about subjective measurement? We can say that a subjective measurement is one that can possibly be interpreted differently. A subjective measurement can be interpreted differently. And so the value we get when we carry out subjective measurement is subject to personal biases. Take note, emphasis on personal biases. We still go back to the issue of the two ladies. In the case of subjective measurement, the assertion beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder is valid. So Lady A may be more beautiful than Lady B. Lady B may be more beautiful than Lady A. They are subject to your own personal biases, personal preferences. And so the value you get will be different, subject to your own personal biases. That is subjective measurement. Let's take that. How about objective measurement? In objective measurement, it is the one that cannot be interpreted differently. Why? Because the value is based on prescribed rules. See that terminology coming back again? Do we still remember how we defined measurement? The measurement is the process of ascribing numbers to quality based on prescribed rules. That we're actually defining objective measurement, which is what we want to do. In this case, we are saying the objective measurement is devoid, is without personal biases. Whatever X gets is going to be the same with whatever Y gets. And if it's subjective measurement is dependent on personal biases, the assertion beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder we hold. Now let's take a look at the Lady A and Lady B to reflect objective measurement. Going back, this is Lady A. Yes, she weighs 40 kg and the height is 1.8 meter. For Lady B, of course, she weighs 100 kg and her height is 1.0 meter. If we are still concerned with who is more beautiful, that means we want to measure the beauty. What we need to do is to specify rules, prescribed rules. So in this case, let's assume that we agree that beauty can be measured using this formula. It's just hypothetical. The beauty is equal to weight divided by height. Let me pause. Take out your pen and paper. Okay. Can you quickly calculate the beauty ratio for Lady A and Lady B? Are you done? So if we agree this is the formula, good. Beauty of Lady A would then be 22.2 and beauty of Lady B would be 100.0. What is our conclusion? Objectively, Lady A is more beautiful. Oh, okay. Yeah, we are correct. Lady B is more beautiful than Lady A based on prescribed rule. Then this is no longer subjected to argument because we are working on the rule. So if we ask who is more beautiful, presumably everybody takes it that there's a rule. Beauty is equal to weight over divided by height. And based on that rule, we can easily get a value that will be clear. No longer will we be measuring and we will now say that what you get is dependent on your personal bias. Your personal bias is no longer an issue. You may have preference for somebody that is slim and tall. That is no longer valid. We have to go by the rule to measure beauty. And that is what objectivity in measurements implies. Having taken ourselves through some basic definitions, let's go to a third thing that we have in mind. That is to classify test item classification. As we all know, test can be classified into two, essay and objectives. Let me emphasize here that there are several ways we can classify tests, but we are taking one of such classifications that is mostly in use when it comes to classroom tests. Classifying tests based on the test item. This is also important, though we might not be able to take it extensively in this training, but we'll touch on it so that we can get a good appreciation. Please, once again, if you have any question, do not hesitate to drop it in the comment section. Now, when we talk about test classification, we have seen that we can classify tests into how many? Okay, you said two, you are correct. And what are they? All right, essay and great objective test item in classifying tests based on test items. What do we mean by essay? What do we mean by objectives? Let's put it in this way. We can say that a test format is in the essay format if the testees can freely compose and present the answers in their own words. What we mean is that essay test items allows the testees to freely compose and present the answers in their own words. So the demand, the stimulus the test present to them demands that they think of the answers and write it down in their own words. Whereas if it has to be objectives, is that type of test that usually, take note, emphasis, usually, not always, usually allows the testees to select the right answer from a pool of plausible answers. So can you see the difference between essay and objectives? But note that some objective tests also allow the testees to supply the right answers, just like in essay test. But what makes the supply different from that of essay? In this case, usually, if it is objective test and the testees are required to supply the answers are usually short. A word, a phrase, a formula, and what have you. We're going to go take them one after the other, starting with the essay. Essay test can be classified into two. The first, extended response item. And the second, restricted response item. What do we mean by this? The extended response item is that type of essay that gives a blank check, as it were. in extended response item, the testees have the freedom to present the answers, organize the answers, and determine what points to include, how to include the point in order to earn the maximum marks. Whereas restricted response item is that type in which there are limitations or restrictions as to the number of points to be presented, as to how the points should be organized. Let's provide one or two examples. Let's use religious studies, CRS. In extended response format, we may ask the question or a particular question: what would Christianity have lost if Saul had not been converted? That question is extended. What would Christianity have lost? There are obviously a whole bunch that the testees can present, but which one will he present? Okay, how many points will he present in order to earn the maximum marks? How will he need to arrange it? But if it's restricted, you might see something like define democracy. Mention 5 advantages of democratic system of government. Now look at it. There are restrictions. The first question, define. You do not need to go beyond define. The second one, mention 5 advantages. In this case, you only restrict yourself to advantages, and you do not need to give more than 5 advantages. If the maximum mark is 20, and because the mark, expected mark, the maximum mark is 20, that does not mean you should give 20 points or 20 advantages of democracy. What you need to give to earn the maximum mark is basically 5. So you've been restricted. That is the difference between extended and restricted. But let me mention for now that it's preferable to use restricted response item in many of our subjects, preferable, not a must, because it creates for objectivity in scoring, which is one of the things that we want to aim at. Extended response format is good when you are seeking for the opinion, the ability to organize. So the content will just be one of it, and the content may never be right or wrong, but how the content are being organized, that might be the basic issue. Let's go to objective. Remember that we mentioned that the objective test item format most often allows the respondent or the testees to select, and sometimes the objective test item format also requires the testees to supply. And this forms the basis of classifying objective test items too. We have the supply test items and the selection test items. The supply test item can be classified into 2 as well. We have the short answer item, which we call subjective. Note that this is very, if I always use the word, dangerously close to essay item. And that is why some even ask the question that short answer item are actually essay. Now, when we talk about short answer item, it's like the essay. The testees are required to supply the test, the response, their responses, but usually the responses are short. While the completion test item, which we call in our local parlance, fill in the gap, expect the response, the testees to provide an answer usually a word, a phrase, to complete a statement or a sentence. The two of them are often very similar. Let me provide an example. If you ask the question, the name of the present president of the United States of America is dash. Now, that is item completion. It's an objective test because the answer is just a name of a person. You can also present the same question as a short answer. In this case, the basic difference between short answer item and item completion is the fact that short answer poses a complete question, while item completion requires the testees to supply an answer to complete a statement. So I've given an example. The name of the present president of the United States of America is dash. In form of short answer will just simply be, what is the name of the president of the present president of the United States of America? Let's move on. Another form of objective test is the selection test item, which can be classified into three. The first is alternative response item, which we often call true or false. In this case, it's a type of test that requires the testees to select from alternative responses, this or that. Most often, the responses are true or false, but there are several varieties that we can have: yes or no, right or wrong, correct or incorrect, good or bad. It's such a very versatile format of testing knowledge. You provide two plausible alternatives, a statement, and you require the testees to indicate whether it is true or false, whether it is right or wrong, and other possible variety. Take note, it has to be plausible alternatives. The second is the multiple choice test item, which we are most conversant with. In fact, this is what many of us think as objective test item. In the multiple choice test item, we're going to have devoted another interaction to discuss about this in detail, God's willing. In the case of multiple choice item, you have your test item followed with three or more options. If it is less than three, it is not multiple choice. It has to be three or more, from three to what have you. But moderately, you see most questions, test items restrict the responses to 4 or 5. There are reasons for it, which we are not going to talk about here. The last is matching test item, very robust. Many of us only think this is limited to primary nursery schools, but we can use it anywhere that we have relationship, date and events, inventions and inventors, tools and uses, what have you that you can ask the testees to match. We are hoping to devote a time in one of our trainings to look at this in detail. If you want that, please, you might want to drop a comment in the comment section. Are we still together? Let's move on to the fourth thing we want to look at for today: qualities of a good test. Standard textbooks will tell you that a good test must be valid, must be reliable, and must be usable. This is important for us to put in mind so that we be able to craft high quality tests. And we're going to take this very briefly as a foundation to what we're going to talk about later. It's the qualities of a good test. When we say a test is valid, what does it mean? That test measures what it is intended to measure. So a test that measures what is intended to measure is valid. May I tell you that this is one critical thing that is missing in many of the test items that we develop. Most often, the test items do not measure what they are expected to measure. We're going to see it from our examples later. Reliability is talking about consistency. When we administer this test at similar conditions but different times, do we still get the same results? This is really important. Usability. This is important because however valid and reliable your test is, in fact, there's no test that is completely valid. There's no test that is completely reliable. However valid, however reliable the test is, there's still another point to put in mind: administrators' consideration or administrative consideration. How well is the test usable with respect to cost of the test and test administration, ease of test administration, ease of scoring, ease of interpretation of scores. For want of time, we'll leave it at that. We'll not be able to discuss that in detail. But let's move on to the critical thing. Note, our concern is this number 5. Tips on crafting effective test items. We need to put in mind all the things we'll be talking about so far. And one of the very first tips is clarity. Another is alignment with learning objectives, avoidance of bias, and appropriateness. Let's look at them one by one. We'll take examples where appropriate. If you have examples, please, you can also drop them in the comment section. Let's start with clarity and conciseness. Your test must clearly and concisely define the task. Note it. When you craft your test, it must clearly and concisely define the task. And how will you do that? You need to use clear and concise language to ensure that the task is clearly and unambiguously defined. I can't but keep on emphasizing on this. When you give your test, be sure that it's unambiguous. It cannot be subjected to multiple interpretation. Be sure that it is concise. Be sure that it is clear. It's the nail on the head. Let's look at an example. This is a very common example from primary up to the university level. Write a short note on photosynthesis. Oh, some may be asking, anything bad in that? Go back to the rule, clarity. How short is short? Conciseness. So when you ask the testees to write a short note, what is it you want? Or what really is the demand of the question? What aspect of photosynthesis do we expect the testees to focus on? This we need to learn. Even if there's nothing we are learning, at least we must learn this. Good example, a better. Yes, you can still make it better. Okay, define photosynthesis. Go straight. Identify any 5 importance of photosynthesis to living things. Clearly defining the task. This is very, very good. This is what we want to put in mind. Remember when we talk about essay test, we mentioned, if possible, as much as possible, rather, use the restricted response format. Let's move on to another thing. Yes, and still on clarity and cohesiveness. Let's look at another poor example. What might be some of the potential implications of climate change on the environment? Can you notice anything that is missing there? Is not directing, the demand is not clear. The demand is not concise. The language has not eliminated the problem of ambiguity. And another thing, which is also important, is how many implications would the testee need to write or mention in order to earn the maximum marks? Grammatically, implications mean to and above. So what would need to be done? Let's look at a good example. List 3 environmental impact of climate change. It's more specific, clearer. Yes, you are looking at potential implications of climate change on the environment, but what point, how many points, content should be indicated. And why do we say this is a good example? It's clear, specific, asking students to identify 3 specific impacts, eliminating any ambiguity or confusion. This is really important. Another thing to look out for, a skill that will help us to craft questions of high quality, is alignment with learning objectives. Don't forget that as a teacher, we draft or craft learning objectives. This is not what we want to look at. But when you are setting your questions, you align with learning objectives. We see in some instances, teachers, especially in the primary school, say question, what is the name of your head teacher? Is it part of the learning objectives? If it's not, then that question is faulty. Look at these learning objectives. Students will be able to identify and describe key events leading to World War I. Now, based on this, look at a poor question. Discuss the events that led to World War I. Already, you can see based on what we talked about before, can you improve on this question? What do you think is missing? Okay, it does not specify the number of points that will earn the maximum mark. That is one of it. But does it even address is it well aligned? Let's look at a better example. Describe 3 specific events that directly contributed to the outbreak of World War I. Note, discuss events that led to World War I. There are lots, direct and indirect. But here he's talking about directly contributing factors. A lot of factors could be there that the student will argue logically and will fit in as indirect causes. But the better examples, specific, give me only 3, and those 3 should be directly related factors. So this is one of the things that we want to put in mind. We are really learning, are we not? Good. Let's take a look at another example when it comes to alignment with learning objectives. Look at these learning objectives. Demonstrate effective hand hygiene techniques in a clinical setting. If you note, this objective indicates practical orientation. And so how will you find out, how will you craft your test to indicate that the students have achieved this, that the test is aligning with learning objectives? Let's take a look at a poor example. List the steps involved in hand hygiene. Can we say that this example aligns well with the learning objectives? Obviously, no. Let's look at a better example. Perform hand hygiene using the correct technique, demonstrating each step, including the appropriate use of soap or hand sanitizer, thorough friction, covering all surfaces of the hands and proper drying. Can you see that this is more reflective of the learning objectives? Let's look at another point to have in mind in order to craft high quality tests. Appropriateness. Yes, your test should be appropriate for the level of the students who are taking the test. The test should not be too difficult or too easy. Another thing to have in mind that the words used should be appropriate to the level. If not, issue of validity. We will not be testing language rather than the content of the subject. If the language we use is too difficult, this is something else to put in mind. Another point that we have to consider when we are crafting our test and want it to be of high quality is to avoid biases. Yes, our test item should be free from biases. A biased question may exhibit bias by favoring or disadvantaging certain cultural, certain gender, or religious groups. For example, we may see when it comes to cultural bias, maybe a mass problem that uses currency or unit of measurement specific to one culture. That's just as an example. We may have gender bias, perhaps when we have a reading comprehension passage that reinforces stereotypes about gender roles. Religious bias may have a history question that is asking students to judge historical figures based on their religious beliefs. Then it's already biased. You cannot ask a question to judge a historical figure based on the religious belief of that person. It might look a little bit biased. Now let's go to what I consider very critical, which I said, if there's nothing we gain, we should gain that. Yes, specificity and unambiguity. This is really important. When you put all this in mind, put in mind that we want to ensure that our test actually measures what they are intended to measure. And we're going to see here that oftentimes we set questions that do not address what they intend to address because of the way we have crafted such question. And it boils down to the issue of specificity and ambiguity. Let's look at this picture. Can you see anything? See the face of the young boy. Can you see? Okay, if you see what I'm seeing, he said, teacher asked me to write an essay on dog. The innocent teacher put write an essay on dog. Can you say that this young boy has done the assignment? I want your answer in the comment section. But I can say confidently that this young boy has done the assignment because he actually wrote an essay on dog. Is he wrong? You can start realizing what I'm saying. Ambiguity has set in. The student has misunderstood the question and has interpreted it in another way that is very, very correct. Because the student has actually written an essay on dog just as the teacher had demanded. And of course, he's taking the dog to the school. I want to comment in the comment section. But some will be asking, how then? Okay, yes. How then should the teacher have asked the question? Maybe as we go on, we might say some of the pitfalls to avoid. But let's go. When we talk about specificity, what do we mean? We need to keep on emphasizing this. When you talk about specificity, It refers to the degree of detail and precision contained in a test item. Specificity determines how narrowly or broadly a question or prompt is framed. A specific test item leaves little room for subjective interpretation. Take note, we are coming back to that subjectivity. A well-crafted question that is specific with high level of specificity will reduce subjectivity in interpretation, and it will ensure that the question is clear and unambiguous. So we can say specificity is all about ensuring that the questions you create are crystal clear and that they leave no room for confusion. This is what specificity is all about. Is there any advantage of specificity? Obviously, one major thing is your question will be of high quality if you can do that. So the impact of specificity, yes, it will enhance the clarity and fairness of your assessment. No longer will your question be interpreted differently, or your question will be interpreted based on what the student think you have in mind rather than based on what the test has actually said. Specificity will ensure that all test takers are on equal footing with no one unfairly advantaged or disadvantaged due to vague wording or confusing instruction. This is really important. But then let's serve a note of caution, the balance of specificity. True, specificity is important, but it's also equally vital to strike the right balance. If our question is overly specific, then it may not gauge a person's overall knowledge or skill, might even be too simple. And of course, if the questions are too broad, too vague, then they may not provide sufficient insight. Then you may be asking, how then can we craft specific test items? Note, this is additional thing that you are never taught in school, but very, very critical. I will try to outline about 5 techniques that we can use to ensure that our questions are very, very specific. Techniques for crafting specific test items. 5 of them. Determine your purpose for testing. Use precise language. We are repeating that. Avoid ambiguity. Avoid double negatives. Focus on one concept. The challenge of the WH questions. We're going to emphasize this. Let's start with this. We'll talk about them briefly, but we emphasize on the WH questions. Yes, determine your purpose of testing. So what is the purpose of your test? Remember, I'll talk about your objectives. This will help you to plan your exam to ensure you test your examinees at the right level. What do you want to use the test for? What are the content? This is going to be important. The next is to use precise language. The words you use must convey the question's intent. Take note, not your own intention. It is whatever the question says, the intention of the question must be very clear. And so avoid complex terminology, use straightforward, unambiguous language. And as much as possible, avoid double negatives because they can be confusing. Keep test item positive and straightforward. For example, you mentioned a question like, which of these is not a characteristics of non-living thing? It's a bit confusing. Is not a characteristics of non-living thing. Let me allow you 30 seconds to think of what do you think is the intention of that question. Okay, see, you are already getting confused. How much more the students in the examination question? So why not ask which of these is a characteristics of living things? Which of these is a characteristics of non-living things? It makes it better. And if you have to use negative, woolly worded question, it should not be double negatives. It's allowed to say which of these is not a characteristics of living thing. It's allowed, but that is not double negative. And when that is done, you emphasize it, N-O-T, possibly you bolden, you italicize, you capitalize, so that the student's attention is directed to the fact that you are looking for the negative part of the answer. So, but avoid double negative is one of the things that will help you to craft your question to be very specific. Another thing which is important is to focus on one concept, and then we are merging it with the challenge of WH question. Each of your test item should assess one concept, one idea, one skill. Don't combine multiple concepts in a single question. It can lead to ambiguity. And the WH questions, you know what they are: who, what, when, where, why. This we use in asking questions, but oftentimes they pose challenges to specificity. I wouldn't know why, but most WH questions pose challenges to specificity. So anytime you set WH question, look at it very critically and be sure that it is not subject to multiple interpretation. What we'll do next is to look at the dangers of the WH question. I will give you a number. I wish we will have time to give you as many examples as possible. I'll just give some examples of WH questions from classroom teachers. Questions that we fetch from the classroom to show the danger of this WH question. We'll provide it with model examples of answers we get from students. Let's start from the first one. Who is the president of Nigeria? Answer: the president of Nigeria is an old man. Okay. Where does the vice president of Nigeria come from? Okay. Oh, you think it's a simple question? Look at an answer. A sample answer from the student: the vice president of Nigeria comes from God, Northeast, his parents. Let's look at another one. Interesting question. Why do we eat rice? That is from home economics, presumably. Answer: because it is delicious. Let me ask, in each of these questions, which of the answers provided is wrong? None. Why? Because the students have interpreted it plausibly in their own way, and you cannot say they are wrong. In the first question, in the class, the teacher asks, who is the president of Nigeria? And the student responds, the president of Nigeria is an old man. Is he wrong? Definitely, the president of Nigeria is not a young man, he's an old man. But the teacher would say something like, but the student did not mention the name. But let us ask, did the question demand of the name? No. WH questions are broad, subject to multiple interpretation. If the question had specified what is the name of the president of Nigeria, that is very specific, not ambiguous, and has led the student to what the demand of the question is. So invariably, we need to take a second look. What is the intention? What is the demand of this question? So when we use WH question, like the second one, where does the vice president of Nigeria come from? Do we want us to mention the state, the region. For example, which of the three answers is wrong? Obviously, without any doubt, the vice president of Nigeria comes from the northeast of Nigeria. It comes from his parents. And of course, it comes from God. What is the demand? Is it the state in Nigeria that the demand? Is it the geopolitical zone? It could even not be wrong for a student to say the president of Nigeria comes from Nigeria. So it's subject to multiple interpretation. Let's look at another example. This one from basic science. Oh, sorry. This is an interesting question. We saw this question in religious studies, CRS, as well as home economics. And the two teachers are expecting different answers. But look at possible answers from the students, still the danger of the WH questions. Look at possible answers. We wash our hands, we pray, we cook, we sit down. Are these answers wrong? Don't we sit down before we eat? Don't we cook the food before we eat? So what is it that is a demand of the question? I do not have any answer, but I will want you to think of how you can rephrase this question from what we've discussed about so far. Let's look at this question from basic science. What, still WH question, do we use to measure our body temperature? Okay, many of you are saying thermometer. Are you sure? Can you take a look at that question again? Is it directing attention to that instrument that we use to measure our body temperature? Well, you might be looking at it that way, but look at a possible answer. And this actually got in from a student. We use the back of our hands to measure our body temperature. Is that student wrong? Is that not what they use, the parents use at home? Obviously, this student has learned more than what the teacher is expecting. But unfortunately, such a student will be scored wrong. Whereas the question is wrongly phrased, is not crafted to be of high quality. Look at this other question. When did Napoleon die? Another WH question. Of course, possibly, I wouldn't know. The demand of the question could have been the time, but look at the answer. Napoleon died in his last battle. Obviously, it's a right answer because he died in his last battle. That was the last battle he fought. Though the teacher might have been expecting the year that Napoleon died. So what we are saying, obviously, is clarity and conciseness coupled with the caution about the use of WH question. Let's take a look at some other questions. These are more recent that we got from classroom teachers. How long does it take the Earth to move around the sun? You might be wondering, nothing bad about it. The Earth moving around the sun. Oh, you may be saying 365 days, 1/4, whatever. But look at what a student says, forever. And I think since the beginning of time till eternity, the sun will continue to move around the sun. Is there a way this question can be rephrased better? Clarity, conciseness, not subject to multiple interpretation? I'll be expecting your responses, please. River Niger flows in what state? I wouldn't know whether this question is even right content-wise, but the teacher is likely expecting Niger State anyway. But look at a student response. River Niger flows in liquid state. Is that not a smart answer? The student is now reconciling what he learned in basic science. River Niger is a river, and a river is a liquid, so it flows in the liquid state. Correct. answer, but the teacher will mark this wrong. This is taken from Islamic religious studies. What is the major cause of divorce? How would you know what the answer is? But look at what the student wrote. Marriage. And I think this is a very intelligent answer. Without marriage, there wouldn't have been divorce. But is that what the teacher wants? Is that the intent of the question? Look at this other question. It's a silly question, but the teacher will not know that it's silly. Maybe you can answer this question. I will pause for you to provide the answer. If it takes 4 men 2 days to build a house, how long will it take 2 men to build the same house? Okay. Look at an answer without calculation. No time. The 4 men had already built the house. And that is why we emphasize that word same. 4 men had already built the house in 2 days. So what is the business of the 2 men? To build the same house again. And of course, what the teacher will have needed to do is to ensure that this question is clear, is concise, is not ambiguous, not subjected to multiple interpretation. So what is it that we have been saying all along? For us to craft questions of high quality, we need to put all these basic points in mind. Ladies and gentlemen, the time is well spent. I really appreciate your participation in the first in the series of our class for today. We want to thank you all for your attention. Please drop your comments in the comment section. God's willing, we shall be meeting next week, Saturday, as we will be talking about the use of AI. Till then, bye for now.